Written by u/Carl 1961. Check his account out. Links in the description. People think I'm a serial killer. It's far worse than that. Part 1. I won't tell you my name. If you watch the news regularly, you probably already know it. I'm rather famous right now, or perhaps, more appropriately, infamous. The media has been covering my story for months, and I've been in all the major newspapers. My name is a source of heated debate. People discuss me in the office break room, and at bars and restaurants. Housewives scare each other with stories of me when they get together for lunch, embellishing my crimes, consulting their imaginations to conjure up the most lurid details they can come up with to get a rise out of their friends. I've been featured on all the big real-life crime shows, and various esteemed professionals in the psychiatric field and criminal profilers have sat down with talk show hosts and major network news pundits to offer their own insights and theories into what makes me tick, what caused me to become what I am. I won't keep you in suspense, I'll just come out and say it. I'm what most people would call a serial killer. I was apprehended 10 months ago after committing 40 murders in 10 states over an 8-year period, and am currently locked up in a federal prison. My murder trial is in progress, and the odds are not in my favor. There's a ton of evidence against me. Chances are good that I'll be convicted and probably sentenced to death. People are already comparing me to the likes of Bundy, Gacy, Gein, and Dahmer. I have to be escorted into the courthouse with armed guards and wearing a bulletproof vest because of death threats made against me by the grieving relatives of my victims. The outside of the courthouse is a circus whenever we arrive. Various journalists, spectators, curiosity seekers, freaks, you name it, are crowded around the front of the building in the hundreds. My trial is being televised, and my lawyer has told me it's the media event of the decade, like I'm supposed to be proud of that. I couldn't care less. Yes, I did commit those murders, all 40 of them. I won't deny it. No, I'm not a sociopath or a psychotic. I didn't hear voices telling me to do it. I didn't do it because God told me to do it in a dream to cleanse the world of sin. I didn't do it because I was trying to impress a celebrity or my dog told me to. I didn't do it for political reasons or to try to incite a race war like Manson did, either. I did it because I had to. Someone had to do it. I killed 40 people. But none of them were human. Maybe I should back up a bit and explain. I guess you can say I had a pretty rough beginning. I know that's the standard excuse most serial killers use to try and justify their behavior, but it's the truth. It all started when I was 8. That was when I lost my vision. My childhood was a living hell. I grew up dirt poor on the wrong side of the tracks, as they say. My old man was a no-good drunken redneck who had trouble holding down a steady job because of his alcoholism. He wasn't articulate enough to express his frustrations with his life situation in words, so instead he used his fists and hands on me and my mother to do it. For her part, my mother was a spineless asswipe who would rather stick with a man who routinely used her and her only child as a punching bag than leave him and try raising me on her own. I often showed up to school with bruises and an occasional black eye, but none of the teachers did shit about it because my family was poor white trash on welfare, so why should they give a fuck? To her credit, my school principal did try to get the police involved a time or two, but whenever they or social services showed up, my dad would always weasel his way out of it with some excuse or another, and my mom always backed him up. Then, after they left, he would beat the shit out of me for trying to start up trouble, as if I had any say in the principal calling them. It all came to a head one summer day when I was 8. I was out in the garage, playing with my old man's tools like most little kids will, pretending I was a plumber or a repairman or whatever. My dad stumbled in, drunk, saw his tools scattered around, and decided the most reasonable course of action was to pick up a pipe wrench and then proceed to bash my head in with it. I blacked out. When I woke up from my coma, 3 days later in the hospital, it was still black. At first I thought I was having trouble opening my eyes or I had a bandage over them. When I put up my hands to feel them and I realized there was no bandage covering my eyes and they were wide open, I began to freak out. The doctors explained to me that the vision center of my brain had been severely damaged in the beating and that I would never see again. My dad went to prison for that. He was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder, but only served 2.5 before someone who took exception to child beaters stuck a shiv in his throat in the cafeteria. In my opinion, the bastard got off way too easy. He was dead, and I was sentenced to a lifetime of being blind. I guess having to take care of a blind kid was too much of a hassle for my mom, because she packed her bags and took off before I was even discharged from the hospital. I never, pardon the pun, saw her again. After that I went to live with my maternal grandparents. They were a decent enough couple, but they weren't much better off than my folks had been. My grandma wanted to send me to a special school for blind kids where they teach them how to adjust to life in the world after losing their sight, teach them Braille and that kind of thing, but those places cost money and that was something my grandparents didn't have much of to spare. Still, my childhood with them was a major improvement compared to the living hell I had endured before. They raised me as best as they could and tried to educate me on their own, but they were country people, and, well, not to sound ungrateful, not particularly bright. And it's not like I could attend a regular school in my condition. My grandpa died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver when I was 11, and then my grandma tried to raise me on her own until she died of a stroke when I was 15. After that, I was sent to live in a state-funded group home, which was just a fancy modern term for an orphanage. There my life returned to a living hell for the next 3 years as I endured abuse from the other kids, bullies taking advantage of my disability, while the overworked, underpaid staff, once again, pardon the pun, turned a blind eye. The administration tried to set me up with a foster family on several occasions, but I guess most people don't find the idea of taking in a blind teenager very appealing. When I was 18 and legally an adult, the group home kicked me out, leaving me to fend for myself. Isn't bureaucracy great? Which was no easy task for a blind guy with no real education or skills. I did the only thing I could think of. I turned to panhandling. I'd stand on the sidewalk with a cardboard sign a store owner had made for me out of pity, begging anyone who walked by, getting by on the charity of others. As I was to find out the hard way, in this day and age, a lot of people don't have much charity to spare, or compassion. I've been spit upon, insulted, called names, told to get a real job and accused of faking my blindness for sympathy. A couple times I even got beaten up, I guess just for kicks. It was pretty much just like it had been in the group home. For all I know, it even might have been the same kids. One hard lesson I've learned in my life is that some people never change. If you're born an asshole, you're going to die an asshole. There are some people who still have a spark of kindness in their hearts, though, and I usually made just enough during the day to buy a meal with. Mostly I slept outside using the narrow space behind a dumpster for shelter, bundling up in trash and old newspapers to stay warm. A few times someone was kind enough to guide me to a nearby homeless shelter so I wouldn't freeze to death in sub-zero weather. That was pretty much how my life went for the next 10 years. I got pretty bitter about it after a while, wondering if this was as good as it was going to get for me, if I would spend the rest of my life a blind beggar on a street corner, ignored by most of society, unable to even see the contemptuous expressions on the faces of those who walked by me, sleeping rough and having to forage through trash cans, eating the stuff others threw away on a particularly bad day when my earnings were pretty light. I started to wish I had never wakened from that coma, that my dad had just killed me. I started to contemplate suicide, thinking about just stepping into the road anytime I heard the sound of an approaching engine. I might have done it, too. Until I met him. The doctor. He came up to me one day, after I had just been pretty aggressively told off by a businessman. You learn to identify people based upon their smells and the way they talk. This guy's smell was a combination of expensive aftershave and briefcase leather, and he spoke to me in the arrogant, cultured, self-righteous tone of someone too important to waste their time or money on unwashed street trash like myself, who basically told me I was a leech upon society who didn't contribute anything and that I should drop dead. After the businessman walked away, I heard someone else approach and just stand there. I could sense them looking at me. You get that a lot? A new voice asked me. It sounded like an older man, probably in his 50s. I could detect a faint chemical smell to his clothes, almost medicinal in nature. Most days, yeah, I replied with a shrug. He began asking me questions. How old was I? How had I lost my sight? How long had I been on the streets? I answered his questions, which were pretty standard questions I got asked all the time, by those who bothered to speak to me at all. I might be able to help you, he told me. I figured he was just another do-gooder offering to buy me a hot meal and spare 20 minutes listening to me share my tale of woe, or some religious type wanting to give me an uplifting speech about how Jesus hadn't abandoned me, and the Lord tests us all and that when my trials were over I would see again in the kingdom of heaven. I had been fed that type of bullshit before, mostly by super pious middle-class churchgoers in their expensive Sunday clothes, on their way to breakfast after having fulfilled their weekly duty and given lip service to God, and most of them never spared me a dime, either. They probably didn't tip their server, either. That's something else I learned about people during my time as a panhandler. Most of the people who care, or claim to, only care as long as they don't have to pay for it. Hypocrisy at its finest. Sorry if I sound bitter, my experiences being homeless made me pretty cynical. Yeah, I told him dryly, how so? You gonna give me a new pair of eyes? It's not your eyes that are the problem. Based on what you've told me, it's your brain that's the source of the problem. He then got down to brass tacks and asked me a question that gave me pause: how would you like to regain your sight?